It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm excited to be joined for the third time on the show by my guest today, Jeb Blount. He's the CEO of Sales Gravy. He's an author, keynote speaker, sales acceleration strategist, and author of a great new book titled Sales EQ, How Ultra-High Performers Leverage Sales-Specific Emotional Intelligence to Close the Complex Deal. So, quite a title. Jeb, welcome back.
Thank you, Andy. I'm glad to be back, and thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, a pleasure to have you back. So, maybe for people that didn't catch one of the first two episodes or live in a cave somewhere, tell us a little bit about yourself just so they know who you are.
I'm the CEO of Sales Gravy. I've written 8 books in sales. I spend last year I did 270 days on the road, so I do about 200 keynotes a year. I run Sales Gravy.
And you wrote a book?
And I've written 8 books, and I've spent this year putting together Sales EQ. This is a follow-up book to Fanatical Prospecting, which has been a worldwide bestseller. And I spend most of my time helping sales organizations, salespeople, accelerate their results through training and development, through coaching, through designing, the sales force and the infrastructure as both a consultant and a trainer. And we've got our firm is growing rapidly, so we've been adding trainers and consultants, and we're running pretty much every day these days. We're growing that fast, which is a good thing. So not only is the economy good and doing well, but I think that the message and our methodology is resonating at least with our clients.
So tell people how you travel 270 days a year and manage to write a book.
You don't sleep. No, I get plenty of sleep. We
talk about time management. We were just talking before we came on there about Jill Conrad's new book about personal productivity. So, clearly this is a topic people are concerned about in sales. So, you're selling, you're presenting, and you're writing a book. How are you allocating your time to do that?
I get more done than most people do, mostly because I use something called time blocking. And what time blocking is I set short periods of time, and I do one thing inside those periods of time. You can't multitask as a human being. Mm-hmm. Our brains aren't made to multitask. Our brains will switch back and forth, rapidly from one task to the other, giving you the illusion that you're multitasking, but you're really not. So I typically block my time into small pieces. I use every moment wisely. When I'm on an airplane, I'm working, and airplanes are my office. Mm-hmm. I do tend to fly first class, which makes it a little bit easier for me, and I pay for that to allow myself the freedom and time to work with a plug that I can hook my computer in.
Sure.
But, a lot of it's just a decision. It's intentional. My wife told me this weekend, I said, well, just finish this book. I've got 3 more to do. And she looked at me and says, you're going to be living all by yourself if you do another book this year. But she says that every time I do a book. It's tough. It's not easy. It's a decision. Now, it's not a lifestyle for everybody. I tell people all the time, people say, how do you do this? I go, well, I love what I do. I enjoy the fact that, last week I was in Amsterdam, I was in Italy, I was in Raleigh, I was in Biloxi. So on Tuesday night, I gave a presentation, or Monday night, I gave a presentation in Italy. On Wednesday morning, I was in a software group in Raleigh, North Carolina. And on Thursday, I was in front of a financial services group in Biloxi. And some people say, why would you do that to yourself? And for me, I love it. I enjoy what I do. It's an amazing thing that people are willing to pay me to talk. How many people get to pay to talk?
Not many, right?
And it's so I enjoy, but every one of those speeches, every one of those moments where I'm standing in front of a group of people, no matter where I am in the world, that has a tendency to turn into more opportunity for us. We get to know people, mm-hmm. and it builds, not only builds your brand, but it gets you get to meet people that you otherwise wouldn't. Now, most people say, well, how in the world could you do that and spend that many days away from home, that many days on the road? It's a choice. It's not everybody's choice. It's just my choice. And you just have to like what you do. If I hated what I was doing, it would be really a horrible way to live. But I like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you didn't like it, people wouldn't be inviting you to speak. I mean,
That's
right?
It's true.
But you wouldn't have the same passion in front of an audience if you thought, God, I really dread this. All right, so let's talk about your new book, Sales EQ. In fact, one of the last times you were on here, we were talking about your previous book, Fanatical Prospecting, which was an excellent book, as is Sales EQ. So tell us just briefly, summarize what the book is about and what was the impetus to write the book now?
Well, I'd say I spent at least 10 years, but probably 20 years of my life trying to understand what is it. And by the way, this is not a pursuit that is unique to me. This is, I think, a pursuit for anyone who's in sales. Mm-hmm. And it's probably a pursuit for anyone who's in any type of skill-based position like sports or what have you. But I've been in pursuit of what's the formula? Like, what is it that makes people really, really good at sales? And I call them ultra-high performers. So typically when we start looking at sales teams, and when back in the corporate world when I was a vice president of sales and we were looking at comp plans or looking at how we would decide how to build quotas, we used a lot of data, like the top 20% produce the 80% of the revenue, get most of the commission checks. But there's another group, and this is the group that's say in the top 5% or the top 2%, the top 1%, and they're there all the time. Like they never leave that. And you know this because you've been in sales organizations and you've seen that there's these perennial winners every single year, and they're so much better than everybody else, not just a little bit. And that's the group I've been in pursuit of. I'm not really into the top 20%. I mean, they're there. Then there are people that are good. There are people who are great, but there are people who are ultra high performers. What is it that they're doing differently than everyone else? Because it's not a talent level, and it's certainly not a skill level. Because the companies that I work with have great hiring practices. They bring in really, really good people. So I started dialing into that. Well, what are the traits of these ultra high performers? And the thing that I settled on were a couple of things. One is that they are disciplined and obsessed with win probability. Ultra high performers don't spend their time. You and I were talking about time a few minutes ago. They don't spend their precious time working on deals that are low probability. Everything they do is high probability. That's how they play the game of sales. And they're also focused on their time. They make sure that they're putting great stuff in their funnel, and that's one part of the formula. And then the other part of the formula is that they're virtuosos with people. I mean, they're just fantastic at dealing with human beings. So they load their dice by making sure that they're putting high quality prospects in the funnel, and they take that to the next level by being so good with people. And one of the ways that they're able to do that is they're able to manage their own disruptive emotions. So when we look at EQ or emotional intelligence, what we've dialed into is a couple of things. A, it's specific to sales. The sales relationship or the commercial relationship is artificial. Two people get together, or in complex deals, multiple people get together for the sole purpose of putting together a deal that benefits both groups. So, but that's not. We're not friends. We're not doing anything like. It's not a leader, follower. It's not a parent. It's not a teacher. It's not a cop on the beat. This is a completely artificial commercial relationship, and inside that relationship, all the parties are trying to work in their own best interest, and they distrust all the other parties. So, what ultra high performers are fantastic at is managing those relationships, managing the emotions of other people, influencing those decisions by using these amazing human, influence frameworks, and at the same time being aware of and being able to manage the disruptive emotions that get in their way. Okay. And if you think about average salespeople and you think about salespeople as a whole, the number one reason why salespeople fail is not all the stuff that we think about. It's their inability to manage their own emotions in the face of dealing with the emotions of a stakeholder.
Okay. There's a lot in there that we're going to unpack. So bit by bit. So the first one is to think about when you talk about, people are, the ultra high performers are people that have really highly developed people skills is, the first thing most people are going to think is, well, that means they're an extrovert. And that's not the case of what you're talking about at all.
No, I don't think that being an introvert or an extrovert has any impact on whether you're going to be great or poor in sales. I mean, there is enough evidence to tell you that introverts are fantastic in sales. Why? Because they're willing to listen. And listening to other human beings is a meta skill in sales. I mean, you make emotional connections that way. You pull people in. You gather information. Now, the flip side of that, of being an introvert, is you have these disruptive emotions of fear and
Right.
insecurity and doubt when you have to put yourself out there and go out and interrupt people. So for an introvert, the biggest issue for them is I'm not very good at getting stuff into my pipeline, or I have to be able to manage my disruptive emotions so that I can go out and interrupt people and bring them into my pipeline, and I can be more assertive in the process of moving deals and shepherding deals through the pipeline. On the flip side of it, extroverts, are fantastic at bringing things in. They're amazing hunters, but they have a tendency to want to take center stage when they're in sales calls, which is, the antithesis of dealing with human beings, because nobody cares what you have to say. So if you want to build an emotional connection with another person, you have to do that. So for me, it's not introvert or extrovert. It's something called dual process. And what dual process is the ability to, at one moment, stand in the shoes of your stakeholder. When I say stakeholders, when we look at complex deals, there's typically an array of people that you're dealing with. So instead of saying buyer, I just call everybody stakeholders. But it's standing in that person's shoes while not forgetting what the outcome of the deal is. So I'm here to get to the next step. I'm here to close something. I'm here to get information. So I can do both things at the same time. This, by the way, is one of the core traits of ultra performers. They're able to do both things. And if you just think about like this, there's a lot of people out there who are really good at relationships. They can build great relationships. And there's a lot of people in our space who are sales experts who I hear all the time. Sales is about building relationships. I hear executives say the same thing. And if you read any of my work, you would think that I was the same person. But I don't believe sales is about building relationships. I think sales is about closing deals. It's about selling stuff. And like when I meet people and they say, I really want to be in sales because I'm a people person, my first advice to them is go do something else, because people don't usually do very well in sales because the relationships gets in the way of the outcome.
Right.
So you have to be able to do both of those things. You have to, at one moment, be able to connect with and influence the emotions of a buyer. And at the same time, you have to manage your own disruptive emotions to be, or your need or your attachment to being liked and accepted and being able to take center stage so you can get out of the way and allow the person to make decisions and get to your outcome.
Right.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah, it does. And I think one of the core premises that you talk about, which I believe I've spoken about in my second book, is that decisions are fundamentally emotional based. And you say that salespeople delude themselves into believing that buyers make rational, logical decisions based on empirical data and information. And really what the science shows is people make emotional decisions for logical reasons, right? Emotions drive it, then they backfill with the rationalizations. So how do salespeople come to grips with this, right? I mean, how do you advise people that? Because I'll give you an example. I was working with this one company, and we were going to sell this huge deal to this very large telecommunications company that I won't mention. We were going to do a custom product development for them. I took the CEO down with me my CEO down to meet with their CEO. And we leave the meeting, and he goes, "There's no way we're getting that business." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, they've got 300 engineers sitting in that office that they're paying. They will pay to develop that product before they give it to us." I said, "But they don't trust their interior and inside people to get it done." But he was an engineer. No, it's just black and white. There was no gray, and it's like, didn't understand the emotional component of it.
Yeah, I think that the reality is that you have two different ways you can do things. So if you were to read the first two chapters of this book, if you read them as in a vacuum, your conclusion would be, well, why invest any of my time in building skills and doing process, because buyers are completely irrational, and they are, and you are, and I am. I mean, that's how our brain works. You're exactly right. But the thing is that it's inside of this bubble of this commercial relationship, there are frameworks that ultra high performers, or UHPs, use in order to basically bend or shape win probability in their favor. So instead of just rolling the dice on the emotions of the buyer, you begin shaping and influencing those emotions through what you do. In other words, you start using or leveraging brain science in your favor. And a great deal of this, and this is what's missing in some cases, and so there's actually a number of books that are written around influence and frameworks, and almost none of them address your own issues. Like the same things that are driving your prospect's brain are driving your brain. Right. So for sales people, we have to understand that we're irrational too. So in order for us to manage our own irrational emotions, we have to become aware of them, and we have to become and get in control of them and understand that. So it begins with, for example, example, the sales process. I mean, being able to understand your sales process and recognize that a sales process is a linear system that is basically designed around the way a buyer's irrational brain makes decisions. So you have to know that. You also have to understand that your buyer has a process as well. And most companies, like you're talking about a company that has 300 engineers, there's a process that they use to vet deals. They put the process in place because they know the people that are buying are irrational. So they want a linear process in place. What salespeople have to recognize is that if their sales process and the buying process are out of sync, then your emotions are out of sync. So salespeople have to learn how to bend the buying process to connect with their sales process. And a great example of that is you get an RFP. And the RFP comes in, and the RFP says, give us all this information, and then we're going to get it in, vet the RFPs, and we'll call you to come do a presentation. Well, if you get one of those and it's blind and you fill it out, your chances of selling it are pretty low.
Very slim, right?
The reason is because you didn't do any of the emotional connections. You didn't get to know people. You didn't do any discovery. So that part of the sales process is built on building that emotion or building that emotional connection. That just didn't happen. So as a salesperson, instead of the emotion of, oh my God, I've got an RFP, let me fill this out and get it to them really quickly, eagerness, which is a disruptive emotion, ultra high performers step back and say, win probability on a blind RFP is 0. If I cannot change the way the buying process works, in other words, if I can't reshape that by calling up the prospect and say, I will not fill out your RFP until I can do this, meet with you, understand you, do a walkthrough, what have you, the ultra performer says, if I can do that, then I'll engage. If I can't do that, then I'm going to move on to something else. So they have these mechanisms in place. And then you have to also recognize when you talk about irrational behavior that every stakeholder is irrationally making a decision. So there's 3 basic processes, right? There's the sales process, buying process, and decision process. And as a salesperson, you have to use the mechanisms that you have in place that allow you to shape and align all 3 of those processes. And when you do that, by the way, you get serendipity. I mean, you get to the point where you start moving win probabilities into like the 100% range. And again, that begins with qualifying. I mean, you have to have qualifying processes in place that match your specific situation. And I don't believe in one size fits all for sales, but you have to have that in place so that you have, again, a gateway that is rational, that allows you to manage your emotions about an opportunity against some empirical evidence that says, this is what the truth is, this is what I feel, and then I can make a rational decision about where I'm going to spend my time. And so as a salesperson, you have to recognize that the way you do things and the way your buyer does things is completely irrational, and it's all driven by emotion. And you have to recognize that your job as a salesperson is to influence the emotions of the buyer, to respond appropriately to those while managing your own disruptive emotions that get in the way of influence. And the way you manage your disruptive emotions is you have to have systems in place that allow you to do that and then recognize where your emotions are getting in the way so that when that's happening, using that awareness, you're able to interrupt that emotion that has a potential to derail your deal.
Okay. So
that's a lot.
Yeah. So, and it's good stuff. But so let's we sort of talked about this a little bit before. So there are, swaths of our sales business that, there are experts that say, look, the science of selling is not about the neuroscience and the social psychology and so on. It's all about the data, right? If we look at our data, because we've got these technologies, we have a lot of transparency into our processes and there's somebody that, made the statement in a blog post, earlier this year, I guess it was in 2016, which was, you're crazy if you think there's still an art of selling. It's all about the science, meaning the data. So in those situations where, it's all about the data, the salespeople have a certain fear that if they're not sort of doing these prescribed steps, that they don't even get a chance really to engage in the emotion, because it's all about sort of this brute force process to prospect and develop prospects and so on. So how do salespeople, put themselves in a position where they can start putting some of this into work, right? I mean, feel liberated enough to sort of be in control, because I think this is one of the big issues I see is that, it's great, absolutely agree with what you're saying about the EQ, but it seems like we have sort of put too many salespeople in a position where they just feel like they really can't begin to sort of exercise the advice you're giving.
buy that to a point, Andy, but I don't buy it all the way. Because I work with customers, and I have clients that are everywhere from startup software, SaaS companies, cloud companies, to national professional sports, to transportation, to healthcare, to financial services. My firm we're industry agnostic, so we work with salespeople all over the spectrum. And I work with companies that have, leveraged technology in their businesses to build a stack of technology and all the data and all the information it brings in. A lot of that's around, lead qualifying and prospecting and those type of things. There's some AI that is jumping into the middle of things and telling salespeople what to say. So far, it's not been very effective because people don't really like talking to robots. But when I look at salespeople as a whole, what I perceive and what I see is that it's the salesperson's inability to get out of their own way that's causing this problem. See, technology should give you information, and it should allow you to spend more time with your prospect, more time being a human being. And what I see for salespeople is they're putting technology between themselves and the prospect. And this is what average salespeople do. Average salespeople say, well, you told me here's the system and this is prescriptive and this is the way I have to do this. But if you look at any of those sales teams, there's a group of ultra high performers, people at the very top, they're not allowing that to happen. What's the difference? And I tell a story in the book about.
Well, and that was sort of my point, though, is what are the ultra high performers feel liberated to be able to do these things? Right?
Well, let me give you an example.
And the middle doesn't. So how do we get the middle to feel empowered to
$4 billion company.
Right.
Inside sales team. They sell high end. I mean, what they're selling, their average sales about $50,000. So this is pretty big, complex stuff that they're selling on the telephone. Right. And there's a group of 25 sales reps, and they're not doing very well. This company has every bell and whistle technology solution you can possibly imagine. They can afford it. They do a tremendous job of hiring. Their assessments and the way they go through the process is fantastic. They hire really talented people who have really good degrees and are smart people, and they bring them in, and they're not doing very well. The director of sales calls me up. I've got a relationship with this company. I've had one for quite some time, and says, can you help me out? I've got a problem. And he says, my sense is that my people are just using email as a way to avoid human relationships. And I went in, spent a week, watched him, and sure enough, he was right. But if you looked at the what we call the ultra high performers, there were two of them on that team of 25. I mean, there were some good salespeople doing well, beating their quota. There's a bunch of average salespeople that were, right at or around quota, and there were a couple of people who didn't need to be on the team anymore. But there was these two kids. Now, these guys were they weren't just a little bit better. They were 300% better than everybody else. 300%. Okay. Now, the difference between them and everybody else, same background, same training, same everything, was that they spent more than 80% of their time talking to people. They picked up the phone. That was their default, both internally and externally. So they were it wasn't just dealing with the people that their customers, the prospects they were selling to. It was also dealing with their internal people. So the people they needed to help them. You sell $50,000 on the telephone, you got to have somebody helping you deliver it, right? So both things, they spent more than 80% of their time on the phone talking to people, human beings. The other group spent 80% of their time on email and text messaging and through chat and working through web stuff. That's the difference. 300% difference. The only difference between the two groups is one group, the ultra high performers, were seeking out human relationships, and the other group was putting technology in between human relationships. And it wasn't the company. The company has a very subscribed process. I know it. I built it. Right? I understand everything about them. And it wasn't a situation where the leaders were saying, oh, here's all the data. I mean, that's the noise that we get from all the guys that are building this cloud-based SaaS service. I mean, they would prefer to have AI do everything. But I'm talking about real world, like on the floor selling stuff. The leadership in the organization was begging for them to have human relationships. Now, the other thing that happens when I tell this story is people say, well, those guys must have been Gen Xers or boomers. No, one was 23 years old. The other was 25 years old. These were guys that were right out of college. The only difference was that one group was seeking out human relationships and they were good at them, and the other wasn't.
Right. And so the question really is, how do you empower people then to become those ultra high performers?
They were empowered. No, this is the point. They were already empowered.
Well, not by the organization, but personally.
Well, there's no personal. You have to make a choice. You have to make a choice. Like, this is the decision you make.
Right.
And the reason that the folks that weren't on there, they weren't empowered, is because they weren't managing their own disruptive emotion that says, I'm afraid of dealing with other human beings. I'm uncomfortable doing that. That is an emotional issue, not an empowerment issue. And when I go to organizations, and I love this, how do we empower people? Right. I don't go to sales organizations for the most part where salespeople aren't empowered to sell. I mean, I go to sales organizations where there's a bunch of schmucks in the sales operation who are putting reports on people, and they've got a lot of things that are in the way that take up people's time. And when salespeople complain to me about that stuff, I just say, get over it, figure it out. This is not a 9-to-5 job. I mean, if you want to make money, I can't help the guy in sales operations that's a moron that's asking you to do stuff. But there's no salespeople anywhere that aren't empowered to deal with human beings. The difference is there's a mindset shift that ultra high performers make. And that is that when I'm able to influence the emotions of a buyer, I increase my win probability. And if you play the game that way, like what I'm trying to do is look at every deal in my pipe and say, what's the probability I'm going to win this deal? And if it's 70% or higher, that's where I'm going to spend my time. If it's 70% or lower, what do I need to do to influence it so I move it up? Right. And so this is what I mean about, from sales EQ, sales-specific emotional intelligence. What sales EQ is the ability to manage your own emotions and to respond appropriately to the emotions of a buyer. That's it. It's pretty simple stuff. So if you're not standing in front of customers, right? If you're not doing that, then this is an emotional issue, not an empowerment issue. Now, could you put some of that on the leadership team because they're not coaching it, they're not monitoring, they're not looking at it, they're not in the trenches with their people? Absolutely. I mean, from a coaching standpoint, leadership has to shift their focus in helping people do that. But the other thing was looking at these folks and saying, okay, so you're doing all this communication on on email. Let me teach you how to manage the human relationship. So it's training. And if I took one thing from what you said, like if we pull something back, take a look at the training processes that your company has. If you're listening to this, think about it. You're teaching average people how to be average. I mean, that's what most sales training is doing versus teaching average people how to become ultra high performers. And that's what I mean. I don't see these wide variations on sales team of talent or wide variations on sales teams, except for some really small companies. You have variations like that. But when you start looking at decent sized organizations, they're hiring good people, but they're teaching them how to be average. I mean, they spend, like, sales training is, let me teach you how to do a 30-second elevator pitch. Well, there's nothing that is more of a turnoff to someone that you're trying to engage with than talking at them. Right. Nothing.
So let me ask you a question, because I had the wrong choice of words when I said empower, because it wasn't what I meant, and I know it pushed your button. So what I really meant is for somebody that's not an ultra high performer, and they're looking at your book and they're saying, okay, I'm average, right? What are the steps I need to take to become an ultra high performer? And that's really what I was driving at. Is I was using empowering themselves is the way to say that. So what's the lesson they're going to take away from the book? The key things that say, okay, here's the steps I can start taking to become an ultra high performer myself.
Well, I think it begins with managing your own emotions. So, and I call them disruptive emotions or destructive emotions because, fear is a disruptive emotion. Sure. If you're an introvert and you're really good at listening to people, but you're afraid to go get new people into your pipeline, you're going to fail. I mean, I don't care how good you are at relationships. If you're not willing to go get more people in your pipeline or more opportunities in your pipeline, you're going to fail. So it begins with, developing your own sales EQ, which is empathy. So learning how to tune into emotions. It is self-awareness, which is a big deal. So who am I? What are my emotions? How are they driving me? How are they getting in my way? And if you want to let's take a look at empowerment. That would be part of it. How am I, what am I doing that's getting in my own way? There's drive, which is getting your own mindset shifted towards the activities that you have to do in sales, and that's optimism, competitiveness, and need for achievement, which are the three components of drive. And in the middle of all of that, there is this need for self-control. So how am I managing my emotions when they begin to run amok? So it begins there. Now, to get there, you have to understand how the brain works, and we spend a good deal of the book teaching you, like, here's what's happening inside of your head. head.
Right.
And oh, by the way, here's what's happening inside of your prospect's head. So first of all, you have to understand why this is happening. If you understand that intellectually, and you have those components, empathy, self-control, self-awareness, and drive, and you start working on those things, that's how you begin moving yourself, your mindset, towards ultra performance. From there, you have to understand how your prospects are working, how your stakeholders and buyers are working. So I understand what's happening in their head. What are their cognitive biases? What are the heuristics or the mental shortcuts they use to make decisions? Why do they do things? And once you understand that, then you can start putting in influence frameworks that allow you in tough emotional situations to get control of the conversation and keep control of the conversation, flip the buyer's script, and pull them towards you. So they're working with you. At the same time, you have to master the core mechanisms of sales. Sales is still a system. It's still a process. And there's three basic processes: sales process, buying process, decision process. You have to align those things, and then you have to master those processes. Things like asking better questions, which we talk about all the time. But how do you ask? Yeah, how do you ask better questions? How do you do better discovery? How do you advance deals through your pipeline? How do you get buyers engaged, test engagement? How do you get micro commitments, and how do those micro commitments add into a bigger commitment? So you have to A, understand your emotions, B, understand the emotions and the brain works of your prospect. You have to C, understand the systems that allow you to manage all of this in a purely emotional and irrational environment so that you maintain control and you can influence the outcome or the win probability of your deals. And then you have to get good at and master those systems so that the systems allow you to take control of the disruptive emotions that are inherent in this artificial environment of a commercial relationship between a buyer and a seller.
Okay, so how does someone develop the self-awareness? Do you have an assessment tool? How do you recommend? Because people are generally, oftentimes, not very good, at least at first pass, of being pragmatic, and that's the way they assess themselves.
We're terrible at that. So yeah, in the book, there's some links in there to get to some assessments. But yeah, you can go take a DISC assessment. You can go into Google right now and type in DISC, and there's a dozen places you can go buy a DISC assessment. Myers-Briggs, we do a sales drive assessment that's focused on drive. So you can do an assessment. Your company probably has one of those things. One of the things I recommend is a 365 review. If you work for a bigger company, go to your manager or go to HR and ask them if they'll invest in that for you. If you've been there for a while, a lot of them will. They're not cheap, but they're great. And if you can't get your company to do it, go pay for it. I've done this before. It's really a great way of gaining awareness because what you get is a coach who interviews all the people around you and they give you a different perspective. So it's like having your own focus group.
Right.
At the same time, you want to have a coach, and there's a reason, for example, why we're coming up to the Masters. I live in Augusta, so the Masters is coming. It's one of the reasons I love to go out to the driving range at the Masters is because I watch these elite golfers who have their coaches next to them giving them feedback because the coach can see what they can't see.
Right.
So you want to go out and ask people for help and find coaches. It could be your manager, it could be someone else, it could be a mentor, but find someone who can shine a mirror and show you what you really look like. And one of the things that I give salespeople advice all the time on is go to your leader. Sit down with your leader and ask for feedback. And this is important for millennials who really want feedback but are often afraid to go ask for it. But you have to go in prepared. You can't just sit down with your leader and say, hey, give me feedback. You want to go in and say, can you give me feedback specifically on these things? Because leaders don't always know what to do either. And so in the middle of all of that, you begin to gain self-awareness, but you also have to understand the cognitive biases that get in the way of that. So for example, we have something called sunk cost fallacy that impacts pipelines, right? So I've worked really, really, really hard on a deal, and everybody's telling me the deal's a loser, but I keep investing in it because I have this thing that happens at my subconscious level that says if I've made an investment in something, my brain says you've already put so much effort into it, you need to keep putting effort into it. And if you don't understand why your brain is doing that intellectually, it's hard to interrupt or disrupt that process. So that's part of what's in the book is we give you those biases, those cognitive biases that get in the way of that, so that if you understand them intellectually, what can you do to handle that? And then finally, one of the things I recommend people, especially around self-awareness, is we have a process called goal sheeting, and you can download this free. It's freegoalsheet.com, freegoalsheet.com. There's no cost. There's nothing. Just go get the thing. We've given, probably almost 1 million of them away. But you can go there and then go through the process of writing down what you want. And this kind of goes back to the conversation that you and I were having pre-show, which is, like, why would I spend so much time on the road? I know what I want. I know who I am. I know what I like. Right. So if I understand those things, it's a lot easier for me to be aware of what drives me and what are my motivations. And we take you step by step through the process. And I think from an awareness standpoint, that's one of the core pieces. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, and the second piece you talk about in the book is acquired intelligence, which is a big issue for a lot of salespeople, which is, you call it the thirst for learning. And this is a part that really is a stumbling block for a lot of salespeople is willing to invest in themselves.
Well, we talk about 4 intelligences in sales, and one is in intellectual intelligence, which is IQ. You have technological intelligence, which is the ability to use, or the skill of being able to use technology to enhance human relationships. Right. Emotional intelligence, which we're talking about, managing your emotions and responding appropriately to the emotions of other people. And there's acquired intelligence. We call it AQ, but acquired intelligence is all the knowledge that you get, the training that your company gives you, listening to this podcast, which, you've got 400 episodes of this podcast. You have a university level degree if you listen to all the people on your podcast. If you read books like Sales EQ or Fanatical Prospecting or any of your books, that's part of investing in building yourself. And intellectual intelligence, your intellect, how smart you are, is only made relevant with acquired knowledge, with the knowledge that you put in there. So you have to do both of those things. So some of the awareness that you may have when you start looking at disruptive emotions are, what are your disruptive emotions that get in the way of you listening to an audiobook or reading a book or listening to a podcast or attending a seminar? What is it about you that says, hey, I already know everything. I don't need to know anything else. And if you can disrupt that emotion, if you can get in the way of that, then you will begin investing yourself and making yourself better, which is, if you think about people who have high emotional intelligence, if you go meet those folks and you know them when you see them, you'll notice one of the things that they do is that they're constantly putting new stuff in. They're constantly investing in themselves.
Right. Yeah. Not to pat myself on the back, but the reason I do this podcast in large part is how much I learn. Selfishly, right? Much as you do too. You do a podcast, you're writing. The process of writing a book is an incredible learning experience. You get the benefit of being able to, afterwards, of being able to teach people this great stuff. But yeah, selfishly, there's also a motivation for writing and creating.
There's no doubt. If you look in the back of this book in the notes, I think we cited at least 100 academic papers and books, and that's just a portion of what I read. I think I read 200 books writing this one book. Right. And I didn't read every one of them cover to cover. So let's be clear about that. But I learned so much writing this. things about myself that I didn't know. And I became better. My emotional intelligence improved just in the process of writing the book, because I started, just sitting down with my wife, I went, you know what? I do this all the time. I'm always doing this. And I didn't realize that my subconscious was driving a behavior that was disruptive and destructive. And by the way, that's one of the beautiful things about having a 365 review, is that there are people, the people around you say, yeah, Jeb, you do these things, and these things hurt me in this way. Right. And if you understand that and you know that, you can make a change.
Excellent. All right. Well, we could talk forever about this, but we're going to have to cut it short. So, Jeb, tell people they can find out more about the book and about you.
Absolutely. You can get the book at Barnes & Noble. You can get the book at Amazon, Books A Million, CEO Read. Really, anywhere that you can find the book, you can get it anywhere, and it will be in all 200 and I don't know. I think there's 600 Barnes & Noble stores across the country, but it'll be in every single Barnes & Noble store.
Still that many?
I think there's still that many out there, and Barnes & Noble is working really hard to sell the book, and then you can catch me anywhere. I'm at Sales Gravy in most places. So on Twitter, on YouTube, you can grab my YouTube channel. On Facebook, I'm at Sales Gravy. Instagram, I'm at Sales Gravy. And then you just type my name in, Jeb Blount, Blount at LinkedIn, and you'll find me there as well.
All right. Jeb, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And friends, thank you for spending your time with us today. Remember, make it part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. One way to do that is make sure you don't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Jeb Blount, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.